Alright, I have a candle lit, and I cleaned my room, or at least the parts you can see, and I have a cup of coffee and my notes right here, and we're going to start talking about what I learned in the class. So, I don't know, I think I just took away so many awesome tools and things from this class. I think the best part about Relational Com, or just all of the courses that I've taken in the past 4 years, is that, sorry, my chair's really creaky, let me sit on the edge of it, is that every single time I left the classroom, there was something that I could immediately apply to my life or to my skills and tools that I use in my relationships as soon as I walked out the door. And it seems as though every Relational Com class is like, I mean, maybe they're all just useful anyway at any given point in time, but they all seem to flow and just be so useful for the season that I'm in. So a lot of the things that I learned in this class, and just through having a relationship with you, Danaher, and with Mindy and the boys, really set me up for success when it came to starting my relationship with Teddy. And I realized that I don't have to say boyfriend or anything, because this is very informal and you already know all about my life. So it was just really useful to be able to use it with my relationship with Teddy and with my relationship with my parents, and everything that I'm expecting when I go home for Christmas break, everything that I dealt with over Thanksgiving break. It was all just super useful. So moving on to some of the readings that you gave, they were all really interesting. Side note, if you could potentially just send me a list of all of the readings that you provide us for the Relational Com class and the optional readings, that'd be awesome, just so that I don't have to go through and copy paste it. Just like email me them, because they're all great and I really enjoy reading them. They're really useful. Okay, so the source, or the reading that you gave me by Keely, maybe, on good relationships, one of the primary points from that article seemed to be that being present and showing mindfulness is the step to, is like a really good platform for any relationship you're in. And then something else that I took away from it is negotiating the good, or the morals and values that you each have as individuals, and as you begin to merge your lives together. I think that's a huge difference between my past dating relationships and entering into and moving forward with my relationship with Teddy, is that prior to now, all of my relationships fell before I was really rooted in Christ, or really rooted in my understanding of what I valued and what I wanted out of a relationship, and the morals and goals that I have set for myself, and how someone else could possibly be involved with that. It was a lot of me just morphing to whatever that person's morals, values, goals were. And so it's been really cool to talk about different subjects with Teddy, just bringing forward past experiences and our faith and our understanding, even right down to the example that we talked about when it came to homelessness or gun control, or how fast or slow the relationship pace is, or who's expected to initiate these things, were all conversations that Teddy and I had to talk about and negotiate, either stay strong to what I set as a high value, or be willing to die to myself in a way, or come to a third alternate conclusion about a subject with him. So it's been really cool. And then also from the Good Relationships article, Genuine Dialogue, I thought was a really cool concept or thing that it talked about. And it had said, in the hard conversations, turn towards each other instead of turning towards the four horsemen, which we'll get into. But this is something that I really see often in my family, and I think I began to engage in without even realizing what this meant, or that this was an idea that a scholar or someone else had thought about. But genuine dialogue, in the sense that, like, there are hard conversations that need to be had. And thinking back on my comm class, and just we learned, or conflict class, sorry, and even what we learned this semester, just about conflict and fierce conversations. Conflict is an opportunity to grow stronger together in your relationship. I feel like many times people look at it as like a war to be had or something to be won, a fight, something that'll tear people apart, but really it's an opportunity for you to see each other in maybe not the best light and be vulnerable with each other, and work through it. So now getting into the Schultz presentation, or the Schultz source, the listening and the four horsemen. So the four horsemen are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, all of which are the exact ways that my family deals with conflict, so that's great. And especially being able to identify this sort of behavior in my parents' relationships. I noted that something that the article had said is that the four horsemen are the things that really destroy marriages. And again, now going into my relationship with Teddy, it just has really allowed me to see what I don't want my marriage to look like, and I've been able to come alongside couples like you and Mindy, or like some of my other mentors, or some people that Teddy has in his life, where it's like, yeah, that's something more similar to what I hope my marriage would be. And really just trying to identify where and when these four horsemen seem to be my go-to response in situations. But something to combat that, as Schultz was saying, is listening and seeking wisdom, like godly wisdom. And it had listed 6 different skills, relational wisdom to have. And all of them had to do with understanding and seeking knowledge from God, which was really interesting to think about, or to see, to understand that like we don't have all of that knowledge just because we do, or we can't attain it just by thinking about it long enough or hard enough, that it really is seeking wisdom and understanding from the Lord. Something else that I thought was really interesting was there are 7 signs of poor listening, all of which I'm very able to identify when having conversations with my father, especially when I had gone home for Thanksgiving break, how I shared a bit about that conversation that I had with him at the restaurant about my cousin and family and all of that stuff. I feel like there were a lot of times where my dad had done one or many of these 7 signs, like jumping to premature conclusions. I have like all 7 of them listed. I was just trying to think of where I was going with this, but even to think about where I maybe respond thoughtlessly or focus on self-centered agendas or seeing from my own limited perspective. It's interesting now to have this list and be able to look and see where I too have done these things. It allows me to give a lot of grace to other people and to hold myself to a higher, just have more responsibility and hold myself to a higher standard, I guess, when it comes to communicating with others. Okay, so the next thing, I just have Communistar written in all capital letters and bolded with like 3 or 4 exclamation points. So the Communistar, as silly as it is, and how you just recently wrote it into the curriculum, has been so incredibly helpful. And similarly to what I've heard you and Mindy say before, it really takes kind of the pressure off of conflict or difficult situations. Like whenever Teddy and I have had not even arguments. They aren't even arguments because we're able to Communistar each other, which is great. The discerning, describing, thinking, feeling, wanting, and then doing. Following this has really allowed us to get to the point without taking jabs or getting sidetracked, and understand and make sure that we are on the same page in terms of what we are actually disagreeing on, or what we actually want out of a situation, or why it made us feel the way we do. And something that I don't have written here, but I really took away from when we were talking about the Communistar in class, something that I will forever just have in my brain, was that you had asked us, is this the way we think conflict should go, or the way that it does go? And I remember raising my hand and saying, like, this isn't how it works in the real world. Like, this isn't how conflict is dealt with. And you had said something along the lines of, yeah, it's because it feels clunky and awkward, but we would rather have clunky and awkward when it comes to communicating than, what did you say, like aggressive and thoughtless, I guess is the only word that it can come to mind. But basically your point was like, it may feel uncomfortable, but maybe that's not a bad thing, and it really is helpful in the relationship. So thanks for that. On to the next Schultz reading that you had given us, the radical discipleship. A couple things that I have written down from my notes are, the gospel is the living truth that changes our view of all reality. This is so prevalent in my life and just in the way that I go about my relationship with my parents and am able to communicate with them. Beforehand, it was a lot more difficult for me to understand grace and accepting people for where they're at, and respecting them and wanting them to grow and find peace in the Lord. But these are concepts that I would never have understood before the gospel. And then it also talked about how the radical communicator is motivated by love, and every day we make important decisions about which information we choose to keep to ourselves and which information we choose to reveal to others. So this, again, applies twofold. The two relationships that I really am focusing on right now are my dating relationship with Teddy and my family relationships. Maybe that's just because they're both not in shambles, but I'm having to think a lot more about them currently. They're relevant. So the decisions that I've made about how to self-disclose and how to be vulnerable with Teddy, and when is the appropriate time to talk about what, especially when it comes to how crazy my family is and just my past, and allowing myself the proper boundaries to be set with him, but also pushing myself to have fierce conversations and to eventually push myself to tell him more and more about my life as we get to know each other. That also reminds me about my dad choosing not to tell me about my cousin's death until rather recently, or ever actually, and then finding out through my siblings. So it is a really important decision because we really have a lot of responsibility in what self people see, and in like maintaining our front person and back person. I can't remember, front stage, backstage person, and just what everyone else around us is able to identify us as. We have a lot of responsibility and role in the information that we share with them. So it's been a lot of learning in this department about what vulnerability actually is and what it looks like to share this information. And then in all capital letters, I have grace, which they gave a really good definition of this. And they said reestablishing loving relationships with God and our neighbor, and putting God first in that sentence obviously makes a difference. I think throughout it all, grace, and keeping all of this in mind about the radical communicator and how the gospel impacts this, it allows me to share grace with my parents and with others who withhold information from me. And allows me grace with myself in sharing information and how I share it or when I share it, or it just gives me a lot of freedom to be able to be vulnerable with others. This leads into the article that you shared about forgiveness. My notes just went a little janky. So the forgiveness article that you sent was really cool because I found it really interesting that it gave different strategies. And not only that, but the tests that they had done with it had given them like clear-cut answers about like positive, negative, or not helpful at all reactions, or no reaction at all is what I meant to say. So forgiveness seeking strategies, I actually just screenshotted this and I'm gonna just keep it because it's interesting. My go-to for forgiveness seeking strategies at times, I think I do a good job of explicit acknowledgement, of apology, remorse, and nonverbal assurance whenever I can. Actually be there in person to have a conversation about forgiveness, or if I need to own up to something that I did. Those are conversations that I always want to have in person, and both of those have positive reactions, but something that has no reaction at all is humor. And I feel like through the discomfort, trying to be better about using proper words. I think that through the discomfort of having to self-disclose that shines negative light on me when I'm forgiveness seeking, is I try to ease the tension through humor, but it doesn't do anything. So that's something to keep in mind. And then forgiveness granting strategies. Pretty good at nonverbal displays. That evicts a positive reaction. I don't think I do too much conditional forgiveness granting. I guess I'll have to ask my parents and friends about that. But the one thing that I think is interesting is, and discussion. Discussion is something that I've definitely learned throughout the course of this semester and last semester, I would say, after taking conflict and negotiation, just being able to actually have a discussion about things that make me uncomfortable or things that I'm granting forgiveness for. Again, the Communistar is really helpful, but something that I do a lot of that evicts no response and no forward movement is minimizing. Saying it's no big deal, don't worry about it, it's fine, things as such, doesn't really help. And then the last thing that I have on here is on humility and the article that you gave by Strom. So I basically just have 4 key things that I took away from it. I think it was listed in there about how to be more humble. And this includes engaging in healthy self-talk, confessing your shortcomings, listening and supporting others, and, oops, I spelled that wrong, help and praise others. And I think throughout everything that I've talked about, whether it was the being mindfulness of good relationships, negotiating morals and values that I have, acknowledging when I'm leaning into the 4 horsemen, as Schultz was talking about, or the 7 signs of poor listening, being willing to use the Communistar no matter how clunky it is, understanding grace, all of this stuff, forgiveness, it all has a level of humility and being humble. Because without it, none of it would really be genuine, in my opinion or in my thoughts. But, yeah, I don't know. This whole semester has been so helpful and so useful in my relationships currently and in my relationships in the future. Even going through the death of Ivan Illich, that was a super interesting conversation that I was able to have. Sorry, I just saw it as I popped up. I was going back to the assignment rubric, but even reading that book was so interesting to think about how the greatest suffering is when our personal greatest good is taken away. So interesting. So to think about how my family reacts, how Teddy reacts, how I react to certain things really emphasizes what we place the greatest good as. Something to think about. So the paper concept, or the paper rubric had said if people only knew blank, then they would have enduringly good relationships. If I had to answer this prompt, I would say, if people only knew how to communicate well, then they would have enduringly good relationships. That would be my answer. Anyway, thanks Danaher for the class. Bye Mindy. Hello boys. Hi Jude. I'll see you guys after the break, maybe even with some Christmas gifts. And please forgive me because not all of the sources were listed in the announcement that you posted, and I couldn't really find them online, so I hope this is okay. But thank you again for everything, and I look forward to seeing you guys after the break. Bye guys!